been the middle class. And the middle class in the United States right now is being gutted. And this wealth transfer has continued under both political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. And this is basically what these children are being told: consume, be silent, die. This is not a message that we want to give to our young people. Now, Mexico had a debt crisis in 1994. They had one in the 80s, and they had another one in 1994. Southeast Asia in 1997, and Argentina in 2002. So the question, again, people of the planet need to be raising the question, why are sovereign nations in such debt? And the reason I raise that issue, because the sovereign nation has the ability to print its own money without borrowing it from a central bank. So we're, as the people of the planet, we're steeped in debt. So these guys, this G8 or G20, these guys get together, and so they talk about in 2008, what are we going to do because we're having this meltdown, this terrible financial crisis. And so who are we going to save? Are we going to save the people? Nope, they don't save the people, they save the banks. Cui bono? Who benefits? Well, this is Lloyd Blankfein. Lloyd Blankfein is the CEO of Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs is a financial bank in New York City, and it has been shown that Goldman Sachs really probably was the prime bank which created the financial crisis of 2008. How did that happen? In the United States, they were beginning to sell real estate to everybody. In the past, if you bought a house, you had to have a credit and a job and a down payment. And over the last few years, they were giving loans to people who really should not have had loans. At the same time, the economy was beginning to slow down. So Goldman Sachs and other large banks packaged these mortgages and sold them into the domestic and the international market. However, they knew that the mortgages were not AAA. As a matter of fact, they even bet against their own mortgages that they were selling to people, knowing that the mortgages they were called mortgage-backed securities. They knew that those mortgages were going to fail. And so people all over the world, in Europe and the United States, bought these securities and they put them in their banks. These securities were allowed to be part of what is called the reserves. But if you buy a security and you think it's worth $1 million, but it turns out to only be worth $1,000, your reserves dwindle and your bank could fail. And so all of this money that they have been spending has not been going to the people who were losing their homes. It went to the banks because they made a bad bet. Now, in my book, I was taught that in a capitalist system, if you make a bad business decision, your business fails. But unfortunately, in our system, if you make a bad business decision and you're a bank, you get bailed out by the taxpayers. And that's basically what has been going on both in Latin America, North America, and in Europe. So the demonstrators went to jail, and the Wall Street bankers got bailed out. This is another friend of mine who wrote a book called The Web of Debt. It's another book that I do recommend. It's a good book that talks about not only the Federal Reserve and the banking system, but Ellen gives ideas for how we can begin to work our way out of this system. And this is going to be, you know, they always tell young people, it's up to you. Well, unfortunately, it is up to you. But if you don't know how the system works, you can't even think about how you're going to get out of the system. So I'm giving you a heads up today. So this is the interesting thing about the fractional reserve system. I got to put my glasses on. And this is the thing that blew my mind once I understood it. If I can get, okay. If you have under the fractional reserve system with a 10% fractional reserve, what this means is that if you're a bank, you only have to have 10% in the bank of what you lend to your customers. For example, if you have $100 in your reserves, you can lend out $900. Where did that $900 come from? It was created out of thin air. It's created, the banks have no money. They only have these reserves. They create money out of thin air. And then what do? They charge interest on the money that never existed. They charge interest on money that doesn't exist. And so that's why the world is in debt. And there's no way to get out of this debt as long as this system is in place. So that if you have $1,000, you can create $9,000 without any leakage, potentially $9,000, which you can charge interest on. And that's the current banking system. So this is how the money becomes devalued. And that's one of the problems. That was one of the problems with the peso in 1994, and that's one of the problems with the dollar, and that's one of the problems with the euro right now. It's becoming devalued as a result of this leak. So Thomas Jefferson, one of our third president, I believe, stated if the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and the corporations that grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent that their fathers conquered. I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. And as a matter of fact, many people say, they talk about the Boston Tea Party as the start of the American Revolution, but the American Revolution really was a revolution against the banking system. And the people who fought the revolution knew about the banking system. And it's one of the reasons why it was written into our Constitution that the Congress, which was elected by the people, should have control of the monetary system, which they gave away in 1913 to the Federal Reserve. And as you can see, the rate of inflation since the institution of the Federal Reserve has skyrocketed, and the value of the dollar has gone down significantly. Cui bono, who benefits? Usury is a word that we don't talk about much anymore, but I want to just talk about how some people through history, and sometimes we have to go back to the older people who tried to teach us that we sometimes don't listen. But this is what Aristotle had to say about usury. The most hated sort of wealth-getting, and with the greatest reason, is usury, which makes a gain out of money itself, and not from the natural object of it. For money was intended to be used in exchange, but not to increase at interest. And this term interest, which means the birth of money from money, is applied to the breeding of money because the offspring resembles the parent. Wherefore, all modes of getting wealth this way is most unnatural. St. Thomas Aquinas noted that money was invented chiefly for the purpose of exchange, and consequently, the proper and principal use of money is its consumption or alienation, whereby it is sunk in exchange. Hence, it is by its very nature unlawful to take payments for the use of money lent, which payment is known as usury. And just as man is bound to restore ill-gotten goods, so he is bound to restore the money which he has taken in usury. Because the ancient world understood that the creation of debt unbalanced society, and it led to disharmony. And that's what we're seeing with all of these riots around the planet right now. Pope Benedict XIV, 267 years ago, issued the Vix per Venit. He said the problems Pope Benedict identified with usury and other, he called them dishonest profits, included avarice, unfeeling attitudes, burglary, buccaneering, cruelty, commandeering, depredation, pillage, plunder, and piracy. These were harsh words from the Pope, but we will examine some of the fruits of this debt usury system and see if these words are indeed harsh. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, why does money come into existence as debt? Because money is just a medium of exchange. For example, if I decided that this bottle of water, if we collectively decided that bottles of water were the medium of exchange, we could collectively use bottles of water for the medium of exchange. Because the money arose out of the need for people not to have to carry things. For example, if you have sheep and someone else has a cow and you want to exchange your sheep for a cow, sometimes it was too cumbersome. So it was easier to use something that was small to say, okay, I'll buy your cow rather than, exchanging the sheep. And so money was basically put into existence as a medium of exchange. Money was never brought into existence to be something that grew, because the only things that have a natural life can grow. And money doesn't have a natural life. And that is why debt is weighing the planet down, because there's nothing natural about the life of debt. So why do we pay compound interest on an asset, a dead asset that never existed? Again, who benefits? This is called fractional reserve banking. Now, the story of fractional reserve banking, any 5-year-old could really understand this. And it's not complicated, and this is the deal. If you put 10 marbles into a tin can, you cannot get 11 marbles out. And this is what the banking system does. We put 10 marbles into a tin can, and we want 11 marbles out. And the problem is that the banks go around the world, and they say, we put 10 marbles in, but we want 11 back. So they say to Greece, you owe us that 11th marble, but Greece doesn't have the 11th marble. In the 1994 debt crisis, Mexico didn't have the 11th marble. In 2002, Argentina didn't have the 11th marble, because the 11th marble is actually fictitious. It's the fake money that the banks make that they charge interest on.